Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we have an interesting story out of the state of Maine where Democratic Governor Janet Mills has reportedly begun interviewing staff for a possible Maine Senate bid. Now this is very significant, as I remember when I was covering the days and weeks leading up to the Roy Cooper announcement in North Carolina. We saw a report a few weeks before he announced that he was interviewing staff for a potential campaign bid as well. So this doesn't mean 100% Janet Mills is going to obviously run for the race, but it does mean at very least we're starting to see some momentum move in that direction. Now, the article from Punchbowl finds that Maine Democratic governors in the process of interviewing campaign managers for a potential Senate run. As the article says, a sign that she is moving closer to challenging Senator Susan Collins, a Republican from Maine, according to sources familiar with her plans. Now, Janet Mills, a popular two-term limited governor, has been flirting with a Senate run for months, while other Maine Democrats have eagerly jumped in the race against Collins. Mills hasn't made any final decisions about whether to run in 2026, but she's growing more serious in her consideration, a person familiar with Mills' thinking told us. Should Mills launch a bid, she'd be the latest in a string of recruitment coups for Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and the DSCC. These include former Senator Sherrod Brown in Ohio and former Governor Roy Cooper in North Carolina. At an event earlier this week in central Maine, Mills openly praised Susan Collins, telling reporters she appreciates everything Collins is doing. But at the same time, Mills certainly sounded like a Senate candidate, saying, "Every day I pick up the newspaper and I read the headlines and I watch the news. And there are a lot of very disturbing things going on in Washington," she told reporters. Mills has said she's aiming to decide by November whether to challenge Collins. Mills moves now to ready her political operation and secure key staffers are an indication she's leaning towards a run. Now, Mills will be 78 years old on Election Day and a possibly awkward standard bearer for a Democratic base eager for generational change. If Mills chooses to run, she'll have to navigate a Democratic primary that does include brewery owner Dan Kleben and oyster farmer Graham Plattner, who Plattner, as we've seen in recent weeks, been getting a lot of attention from national Democrats and on social media as well, getting the endorsement already from Senator Bernie Sanders. Now, Mills does start out with higher name recognition and solid approval ratings after two successful gubernatorial bids. People who know her say Mills is eager to run for another office, but felt obligated to consider it, especially after she sparred with President Donald Trump over the transgender athletes issue at the White House earlier this year. As Punchbowl reported, Senate recruitment in Maine has been complicated by Collins' stature. Few elected Democrats are eager to take her on, and the race to replace Mills in Blaine House, which is the capital in Maine, has tied up much of Maine's Democratic bench. This is very important here, and this is a point that's been made in several of the videos where I've gone over this. Collins is the only Republican senator up for re-election in a state that Kamala Harris won in 2024. But the long-serving Maine Republican is a formidable foe, dispatching Democrat Sarah Gideon in 2020 despite an avalanche of Democratic money and being written off by many pundits. And I believe if you go back in time to my own videos back in 2020, I do believe I did have Susan Collins losing that race as well. So just be transparent on that. So this is very interesting. And again, we've been talking about the Senate race for a lot of weeks now. If you're a returning viewer of mine, you know I've been covering this race very closely. Because this is honestly, I think, one of the most fascinating Senate races in the country, really because how open it is. Because when you look at the Senate map in 2026, especially like places like North Carolina, you know it's going to be very close. You know it's going to be Roy Cooper versus Michael Whatley. It's going to be an absolute nail-biter of a race. Jon Ossoff in Georgia going to be facing off against one of the Republicans. Going to be a very close race. The Democrat probably has a slight advantage there, but it's going to be very close. Maine is such a wild card because despite it being one of the top targets for Democrats in 2026, it's almost kind of being a little bit under the radar right now. Janet Mills entering this race, I think, would certainly change that. But Maine's a very interesting state because at the presidential level, it just voted for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump by about 7 points. That is a likely Democratic win. At 7 points, it was about a point more blue than New Jersey and Virginia, and then it's also about 3 points more blue than Minnesota. So it's not exactly a battleground state, though it was back in 2016 against Hillary Clinton, where Clinton won it by about 3 points, but there was a lot of third-party vote. Joe Biden in 2020 won it by about 9, and in 2024 voted for Harris by about 7. So 3 elections in a row now, Maine has been under 10 points for the Democrats versus the Republicans. So it's not a super blue state, but it's not really a battleground state either. And this is the comparison I want to make here, you look at some of the other Republican senators who defeated Republicans who defeated Democratic incumbents in 2024. Jon Tester in Montana and Sherrod Brown in Ohio specifically. Look at how the states voted in 2024. Donald Trump won Montana at the presidential level by about 20 points. Donald Trump won Ohio against Kamala Harris by about 11.2. But the Senate races were much closer. Tim Sheehy defeated Jon Tester by 7 points. Sherrod Brown lost to Bernie Moreno only by 3.6. And these states voted a lot more for Trump in 2024. Now, Maine is very interesting because even though you could flip this and say, well, the Democrats, based on 2024, should have a great opportunity at winning this race, and seeing as it is less red than Montana and Ohio was, with the situation flipped around, Collins should probably be in more trouble than Brown and potentially Sheehy were. But also, Maine's interesting in that its other senator, is actually independent Angus King, who caucuses with the Democrats. So Maine does things a little bit more quirkier at the Senate level than a lot of other states too. Now in 2020, Susan Collins was able to win against Sarah Gideon by 8.6%. Now obviously that is a very big number, but something that doesn't get talked about a lot in this race is that Susan Collins, despite winning by 8.6%, got 50.98% of the vote. The Democrat Sarah Gideon got 42.39%. And when you look at how the results ended up breaking down, Susan Collins won on the first round of voting. Don't forget, Maine utilizes ranked choice voting. So Collins, this ended up being the end result, as she got 50.98%, and won. Gideon, the Democrat, only got 42.39%. With two other independents in the race, Lisa Savage and Max Lynn, Savage getting almost 5% of the vote. So if Lisa Savage and Max Lynn were not in this race, there's a real possibility Susan Collins still wins this race, but wins by a much smaller margin than that 8.6% on face value. And you would have to assume, with Janet Mills being the governor of Maine and holding likely higher favorability ratings and also higher name recognition numbers than Sarah Gideon did back in 2020, and much more prowess at fundraising, this is going to be a more competitive race than it was in 2020, where it ultimately ended up being. But I think we're using a little bit revisionist history on Maine Senate race for 2026, as the polling actually showed Sarah Gideon likely to win this race. She had a 3.8% lead on the 270 to 1 average, 6.5% in the Real Clear Politics average. Just to give you an idea here, the polling data for Florida's 2024 Senate race for Rick Scott, where he ended up winning by about 13.5%, the polling in that Senate race was under the margin, was smaller than what Sarah Gideon led over Susan Collins when everything was said and done in this Senate race in 2020. So Sarah Gideon, based on the Real Clear Politics polling average, looked to be a lock to win this race. And look at all the polls heading into October in the final month of the campaign. They all showed Sarah Gideon winning, and by a large margin, showing her around the low to mid 40% or so on the first round, and then after ranked choice voting, Gideon would be winning over Collins by a very large margin. And this was pretty consistent. The last time Susan Collins led in a poll, you'd have to go back to June of 2020. That was the last time. Gideon led in every single poll or is tied in every single poll from then. And what ended up happening, obviously, we saw Susan Collins pull off a big upset as the incumbent and win with 50.98%. Now, it needs to be talked about for the Senate race because this is going to be, despite how close 2020 was, this is going to be the toughest fight that Susan Collins has ever faced. And it is worth noting she has not even officially announced that she is running again in this race, though she is eyeing a sixth term and giving a lot of indications that she'll probably run. But she has not officially entered, but she probably will. The Democratic side right now, if the Democrats, like a Graham Plattner, were to advance to the general election, I think he would probably be in a similar situation to Sarah Gideon, where he would have a large amount of national Democratic support, and he would still have a very strong chance at winning this race. But as a first-time candidate, does not have the proven track record of winning statewide like Janet Mills does. Which is why, when I talk about this race, it's essentially like having Maine's version of Roy Cooper or Ohio's version of Sherrod Brown running in this Senate race. And you have to give the Democrats credit here, because the Democrats, at least for 2026 thus far, seem to be doing a very good job at recruiting top Democrats. Chuck Schumer gets a lot of hate from a lot of Democrats, especially a lot of younger Democrats. But when it comes to getting top-tier Democratic candidates who are electable in their state to run, he's gotten Sherrod Brown, he's gotten Roy Cooper, he may be getting Janet Mills as well. He's fielding very strong Democratic candidates from a candidate quality standpoint of people who've gotten elected statewide before, hold decent approval ratings, and would have a chance in a general election. And Janet Mills appears to be the latest name in this potential regard. Now, no polling data has been done yet for this race, but you can already see this race is very much going to be a very close one. Inside Elections has it as tilt, Cook Politico and Sablo Crystal Ball have it as lean for the Republicans, Rachel White House has it as toss-up. If Janet Mills enters this race, I would not be shocked one bit to see this rating all shift to toss-up across the board. Now, for Maine itself, Susan Collins, as I mentioned, won by 8.6% in 2020. This was down from 2014, where she won by 37 points. So obviously, based on those numbers, it got a lot less red in that 6-year span, showing as American elections have become more polarized in a state like Maine, even though Collins won by a lot back in 2014, she only won by 8.6 in 2020. Now for Janet Mills, she won re-election in 2022 against former Republican Governor Paul LePage outright on the first ballot by 13.2%, a very large, likely Democratic win, in a Republican midterm year, mind you. In 2018, Janet Mills first got elected governor in Maine by 7.7% against the Republican Sean Moody, again on the first ballot. Now, the Democratic primary, there were a lot of candidates running as well, but Janet Mills, the Attorney General of Maine at the time, did ultimately end up winning this primary and ultimately ended up winning by a pretty large amount. Now, in the first round of voting, it looked pretty competitive, where Mills had 33.1, Adam Coate 28.1, but after ranked choice voting went into effect, we ended up seeing Mills winning 54.1 to 45.9. Still not a massive win for Mills, but obviously good enough for her to go on to win and advance to the general election and then win this general race. Where for Mills, it actually looked like a toss-up from some rankings, leaned to likely for some others like Sablo's Crystal Ball and 538, having it as a lean Democratic flip. The polling on this one, not a lot of polls were conducted, though it did show Janet Mills leading by a pretty large margin, and she won by 7 points. Emerson had her winning by about 8, so again, right around that margin that it ended up being. So why am I showing you this? Because I think the Maine Senate race in 2026 has the potential to be like another Senate race from 2018, where it was the Senate map here from 2018, where Republican Governor Rick Scott defeated Democratic incumbent Bill Nelson by 0.12% of the vote. Rick Scott, heading into this election as the governor, had decent approval ratings for the time, but was running against a Democratic incumbent in what was going to be a very close race. And the polls went back and forth through this race, so much so there was never really a clear indicator which candidate was going to win heading into the final election. Now, as you can see early on, it started out with Nelson leading, but then as things got closer, take your pick. Democratic win, Republican win, Democratic win, Republican win, back and forth really, even through Election Day. And ultimately it led to a super close race. Rick Scott only won by about 10,000 votes, and what was to many a shocking political upset that the longtime Democratic incumbent lost to the governor of the state. And I'm saying this because, tell me if that sounds familiar. 2026, the Senate race in Maine, you may see the governor of the state running against the incumbent U.S. Senator, who the incumbent U.S. Senator in their party believes that she probably cannot lose, while the Democrats are thinking if they run a good candidate, that they can win. I think Maine Senate race is going to be very close, and if it's Janet Mills versus Susan Collins, may very well end up being the closest Senate race on the 2026 Senate map. For right now, in my current rankings, until Janet Mills officially enters this race, I do have it listed as Susan Collins in the lean Republican column. But I would not be shocked one bit come November of 2026 to have Janet Mills defeating Susan Collins by under 1 point in Maine Senate race when everything is said and done, like Florida's 2018 Senate race. Because I don't think this, even with 2026 likely being a strong election environment, I really don't think this is going to be like a Susan Collins gets blown out type election. Getting over 50% of the vote in 2020 last time was still very significant, and though Collins probably has a bigger chance at losing in 2026 than she did in 2020, I think it's still going to be very close. But I do think Janet Mills presents the Democrats a stronger opportunity, even if not winning on the first ballot, at very least, keeping Susan Collins under 50%. Because depending on if any third place candidates run, getting under 50% and going to ranked choice voting is likely going to be how the Democrats win this. It's possible Janet Mills wins outright, but against a Republican incumbent, I think it's more likely than not it goes to ranked choice voting, and that's how Mills ultimately wins, which again I think leads it to being a little bit under 1%. We saw something kind of similar to this in the House race in Maine 2nd District in 2024, where Jared Golden won by 0.55%, where on the first round of voting here, we can actually see the results, where after ranked choice voting, Golden ended up winning 50.3 to 49.7. On the first round, it was like Golden had 49.3, Thorold had 49, and then it went to ranked choice. I think we may see something very similar in the Senate race in 2026. So for now, I'm leaving it as lean Republican, but if Janet Mills enters, I think we very quickly could be talking about this race being a tilt Democratic win. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts, and hope to see you in a future video.